So let's talk about KRBA. Now, the reason I got involved was I go down there and record those public service announcements. And as I've done that, I've got to know, I knew Stephen before. Stephen was actually, I think he was my radio rep when I got to Diboll, and/or he would come on in, Ina Jane. Ina Jane, this is Mike Koenig right here. Mike works with KRBA and the other stations there. So I go down there and record public service announcements, and I've got to know them better. And actually, Janice Ann, for your information, we have started a little program on Friday afternoons from 12:30 to 1:30 called the Chit Chat Show, only because we don't know what else to call it. Okay, and we talk about local history there and quote, "I am the expert," and there are no experts. The fastest gun in the West, about the time he thought he was fastest, got shot. So I don't even pretend to be the expert. When I think that, I think Woody Gann or somebody at Wydad or someone like that. But as the old man that worked for us is, I guess that means I'm getting ageable. So they began thinking of me that way. And, I readily admit on that show that, I don't know everything, and there's probably going to be something you bring up I don't know, but we'll find out. And so we've been doing that, and I discovered from looking at a picture on the wall, it had a picture of Daryl Yates in front of the transmitter station, and it said it was the day that they went on the air, May 3rd of 1938. Now, they had told me that this was the 80th year, and we were hoping to get something in this last edition of the newsletter, but Keith already had it planned, and we were still working on Kelties. This is the first newsletter we did on Kelties was about the curse. So Keith called this about the regular guys, the other people that lived out here. This is Kelties Part 2. But I hope to write something for the newsletter about this, and that's neat. 1938, as I recall, you might want to correct me here, I'm not sure I'm right, but I think the first radio station in the nation was 1923. Does that sound about right? And so that means only 15 years after radio made its debut in America that Lufkin got one. Now you'll have to realize this was an AM station, and as I understand it, I didn't have that second or third conversation with Stephen to kind of nail that down. But I don't think they broadcast day and night that first day. I think it was daytime only, maybe, and it might have been daytime only for a while. But when it came on the air, as you'll see in that article, it said that people came downtown and some of them stayed a week. They brought guitars. He let some of them that could play on the air. I think you may be able to help me with this, Janice Ann, but I think my impression of our TV station was, if you look back on some of the programming, we were hungry for anything back then. When it came on the air in '55, and things that would pass then probably would be passé today. I can remember Jake Armstrong holding his mouth open like this and hitting his head and making a hollow sound, as the cameraman, and they had the Princess Betty show with Betty Connor on Saturday. I went to that, and Betty Connor, yeah, that's right. Double H Ranch. She was an actress who was in The Flying Nun with Sally Fields. So, but radio made its appearance, and Daryl did a lot of the work in the beginning. I had an interview with Keith Sims yesterday, who worked down there forever. I asked Keith, was Daryl ever a DJ? And he didn't think so, but in the beginning, when Panther football began, he did it. As a matter of fact, it says in one of those articles that he did the engineering, he did the DJing, he did it all. And Panther football, May 3rd was their first day on the air. The following fall, they did Panther football, and they did it until 2010, I think, according to Keith Sims. They lost it for a while, but they got it this year. They got it back, didn't they? They got it back. So I remember when I couldn't go to the games that I listened to KRBA. And I have fond memories of the station. When I was a boy, of course, Artie was 12 years older than me, Laura was 5, so I listened to their music, like Green Door and Artie's Age, and the Everly Brothers, Hey Bird Dog, Get Away From My Quail, and all that type stuff. And then my sisters too, so they had the request line going. I thought, until I did this, that Ken Carter was Laura's age. Laura graduated in 64, but Ken graduated in 61. I did not know that, and I thought he was there a while. I thought he was there in high school, but he from what I can tell, he could have been that he was there a year and a half, and the city director, he got the latter part of a city director and didn't get in or something, but he went on to Key in Nacogdoches after that, and then it wasn't too long before he went to Texas State News Network, and he had a great radio voice, Ken Carter did.
That was Tiny.
Tiny, yeah. Now later, we don't know the answer to this, but later he got the nickname Hubcap Carter. He had an act that he did called Hubcap Carter and the Wheels, and he was a mountain of a guy. He was big, Now I have heard that the reason he got that nickname was that he got drunk one night and he was taking the hubcaps off the cars on Lynn Matoyer's Lufkin Lincoln Mercury on the car lot, but I've not verified that, so we won't incriminate. He's not living. I did Tiny's funeral when he died. His brother was best man in my wedding, and we had a lot of points of contact. And I always noticed that his brother, Mike, was always very in tune with music. And Keith kind of enlightened me. I've never done radio except for public service announcements or cutting radio spots for my dad's business and things like that. But the way that worked way back there, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but to encourage them to play the 45s, they would send them 4 or 5 at once, because if one got damaged, then they had an extra one and they wouldn't have to send it. And before the chart came out, they hoped that the stations would play them so that they would help with the charts. And so, Keith enlightened me on some of that. I'm not real privy to the business. But let me say this. In 1938, radio was in its infancy. As a matter of fact, do you happen to know who Mitchell Torok is? Yeah. Well, he married Gail Redd. We had a story on him. He actually contacted the Lufkin Daily, and Mitchell was working for KTRE, and he did a show a few times a week, and I think maybe every afternoon, and they couldn't pre-record it because they weren't using reel tape yet. But about 51, he said they started using it, and he could pre-record it. He got $25 a week for recording that. And he was the quarterback at SFA, and I guess he had to drive from Nacogdoches to do that. But that was 51, and that was the rival KTRE. Now, there are a few rough spots in this, personality clashes and, rivalry between different groups and all that, but we won't play that up in a big way, but we will at least acknowledge that it was there. So from 38 to 47, he was alone in Lufkin. There was not a station between Palestine and Houston. There was, what I understand, KPRC in Houston and KTRH. And those were also TV stations later, weren't they? KTRH was not 13 and KPRC was 2, I believe, later on. So he had the newspapers to compete with, but what is interesting to know, and it occurs in that article, is that he was the editor of where he came from in Kansas, of the newspaper there. And he had a background. Then he went from Kansas to Galveston. If you know much about the Galveston, there was a family down there that was very involved in newspapers down there. And maybe they went into radio too, I'm not privy to that. But there was a KLUF station down there, and that's where he worked as a salesman to begin with, as I understand it. And then later he was the manager of it. But he began coming up here and checking out how viable it was and decided that this was the place to put it. So now, he did not get encouragement by some of the powers that were. I don't think the Kurths were exceptionally excited about him doing that. There were other people that were eyeing that. And I don't know if they got interested after he got in or before, but the Forest Capital Broadcasting Company was the one that started KTRE Radio, and that was Hank Huggins and Royce Christensen, and I think Hamp Keithley had that Hamp and Egg show in the morning. I remember how proud I was that I got to call in my grandma's birthday to Hamp and tell him. He was always real gracious and made you feel like an adult and all that. But radio was more personal then, and I will go into a little bit about how it's changed, and of course Mike could probably fill in that a whole lot better than I can. But so I think originally, didn't they actually cut something like records to play, maybe? There was some machine that they could do something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Original automation.
Yeah. So they had a lot of live stuff, and some of the early people that came in to play were Richmond Lewin. Richmond Lewin was Delilah's husband. Delilah was a McGoy from Huntington. Interestingly enough, Delilah worked for the Cloud, Josie Cloud, Mr. Cloud that had the Huntington Herald, and she ran the linotype machine at the Lufkin Daily at one time. Richmond left Darrell to start the other. I don't think that was something that Mr. Yates was particularly proud of, to surrender someone that he invested time in to go to the other company. And they officed, of course, above J.C. Penney at that time. Murphy Martin was one of them, Richmond Lewin. Now, do you know about what year Murphy graduated from high school?
1942.
42, okay. Then he would be about...
Mother and Daddy's class.
He was one of those.
That was Nash Hogue's class along in there, wasn't it?
41 to,
Yeah.
I know my mother and daddy were 41.
Yeah.
For sure 41 for
Yeah.
both
Yeah.
mother and daddy.
Okay.
I don't know about Murphy. Some of them stayed over and played football.
Yes.
And
See,
I think Nash Hogue was 42.
was he? Okay. Sally, I saw Sally the other day. And by the way, she has some annuals that you might be interested in. I think they're already at the library. And they're not his. They're earlier, though, like 40, 41, 42, somewhere in there. And she doesn't want them. But I couldn't find Murphy to try to place him. In his book, Front Row Seat, he didn't mention KRBA. He mentioned Forest Capital Broadcasting, but he didn't mention KRBA. So along the way, let me just highlight some of the people that I knew some of them, but some of them I didn't. This is a list of some of the people that were there, and there's some others in those articles that I'm going to miss in this list. Tom Houston worked there in the 70s. I met Tom. I was next door neighbor to Phil Parr, and He palled around over there. Bob Allen, I think Bob Allen went on to greater heights maybe. Billy Marlin, Bob Lewis did the religious part of it, and Bob did his funeral, by the way. Jim Beam, Jim had an upholstery company, and there was Richmond Lewin, Murphy Martin, Ken Carter. Butch McIntyre was the same time period as Ken. I'll come back to him in a minute. Hub Trevathan, I did not know that till yesterday. I never knew Hub, only heard about him. Bill Bartlett worked there a few years, I found that. Butch Pitts had the swap shop, and he did, after he left Houston and came back, Butch did some too. Phil Parr didn't actually work for the company. He bought time from them. It had a country and western show. Debbie Richardson is there now. Someone named Rob Myers called the SFA games. There was also a man that recently visited, we talked about this, Arthur Ray Thompson. And from what I understand, Darrell hired him away from KTRE. He was reading football scores on Sunday. I think it was Sunday, and Darrell hired him away. I was also told yesterday that a guy my age, David Anderson, worked there, but I haven't confirmed that with David yet. I'm not sure that's right.
I think so, because that's Susan Ames' son.
Huh?
That's Susan Dickens' son.
No,
That's
That's
not
a
the
different day.
no, that was, his dad worked for, wasn't his dad Jim? His dad worked for Perry Brothers.
I don't know, but the one I know, David Anderson, is no kin to Susan Anderson. But David Anderson is bound to have worked here at KRBA.
You think so?
Because he became kind of famous.
Yeah, he's a newsman in Austin area
He's in
now.
Austin now,
Yeah.
in the Austin area, working in a radio place. Or,
Yeah, he's been in radio all this time, I think.
Yeah, he's in, maybe management, ownership of the station.
Oh, is he? I didn't know
Maybe,
that.
I don't know that.
Do you happen to remember his sister's name? His mother was named Thelma, I think. Thelma, and they lived over there off of Fagan.
Well, Thelma Anderson was the
Draft.
No, that was Thema Anderson. This one, I think her name was Thelma. Zelma or Thelma, I forget which. And his dad was big into baseball. Alan Vinson sold advertising there.
Oh, he was a broadcaster, I bet, too.
Was he? I didn't know that. Cesar Rodriguez helped do some of the Hispanic programming. Jim Bell worked there some. So those are some of them, and there's some others mentioned in the article that I didn't list on here. Now let me just sort of go down. Our city directories are sort of patchy. We start out with city directories in 1928, 22, 23, 25, 28, 37, 40, 41. So about the time he started, there's a 2-year gap there that we don't have. And I tried diligently to find Murphy Martin, but I couldn't find him. Let me go back to Butch McIntyre. Butch told me that Ken Carter, Tiny, never let him forget that Shirley Yates hired him 3 months after he started at KRBA. And Butch went on to be a DJ down in Houston. Now what's interesting is that in looking back through the city directories, Ken was listed as an announcer right out of high school, but Butch McIntyre was never, his name was R.B. McIntyre III, wasn't it, as I recall? He was never listed, even though he worked there at the same time for some, I don't know why. I think he might have been living with his parents, and maybe he wasn't there, or they didn't tell him, I don't know the reasons. But, for a long time there were not many FM stations. And what was interesting that Keith brought up to me was Darrell, you remember in your article that he had, in 85, he had KDEY, which was an FM station. It failed, actually. It never really made money, and Keith told me the reason was there weren't enough people with AM, FM radios, you know? And so, and it was, because there was not enough people with FM radios, they couldn't sell the advertising to it. So I believe they can that. And we may have to have a repeat performance where we correct my errors, but this is what I know today. Now, I started in 1948, 40, looking at those. Now, what was surprising to me is the reason it's called KRBA was that stood for Redland Broadcasting. Actually, I'm not sure whether it's Redlands with an S or without, but it's Redland Broadcasting Association. And in that article, one of them, I think it might have been the one that Keith wrote, he was going to put it closer to Nacogdoches, but the Shreveport station had the same frequency. And they were afraid that if he got too far up there, it could interfere. So they made him move it closer to Lufkin, and it's out on Spence Street, still there, in the same place. They bought land February 23rd of 1938 from the Jim Singleton family. He had a clothing store, and he worked, well, somebody in the Singletons did. He's the guy that hired my father to go to work for Miss Campbell, April 1st, 1936. He was working at Campbell Furnish Company with Uncle John and Aunt Julia, and my dad went to work for Cut Rate. But they bought that. I don't remember the price, but okay, picture this. February 23rd until May 3rd is not very long to get that building. It's not a big building, but to get it up and get it ready and all that. And so they did, and it's still there out on Spence Street. And you know, Spence runs up there to the right of Brookshire Brothers, I believe. MLK goes by Brookshire's Warehouse, but over to the right, it goes up, I think, maybe to the Expo Center, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere over in there. Okay, the thing that was interesting as I looked was it began on the top of Cash Drug Store. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Cash Drug Store I always thought of as being across from the Pines. You know, Kate Ivy, Knox Ivy's wife, sold cosmetics there, one of my Chansey relatives, and they had a little hamburger grill, you know, you could order drinks or whatever. But Cash Drugs actually was in the old Denman building. It had a store there at one time, and Margaret Bullock's family was involved in that. She was a Copes, I believe, from Diboll. So it was on the top of there, and later on, Hiram Ralston officed up there as well with them. I'm going to stop here. When I got out of college, I recently wrote this up about the day I graduated from SFA, and I went up there with my roommate in a 67 Ford Fairlane, and he was from Orange, and he was getting his master's in management. I was getting my bachelor's in English and political science, and I was going, in between us was an old flame that was about to become reignited, Jim Massengill's daughter, and but I wrote in there that I was just about as clueless when I graduated of what I was going to do as when I started, okay? So one of the things I came up with was that I was going to go to law school. Surprise, surprise, my father talked me out of it. Never had he intruded into my life very much, and he had me go talk to Hiram Ralston. He said, "Dickie, there's such a thing as a hungry lawyer," you know, and so yeah, I guess I didn't want to do that very badly because I didn't go to law school. And of course, you know, baby boomers, there were a lot of us, and the law school enrollment had doubled because of that, and it was a little harder to get into. But I looked on, and it was a while before it actually got down to Cotton Square, and as you know, later Cotton Square became Calder Square because the philanthropist gave us some money, and he had some relationship to the Ewings, who was Charles Kelty's son-in-law, James A. Ewing. Well, one interesting thing that came up was that the police station had a radio station. and Yancey Rhodes was the guy in charge of that. Some other guy named Boney something or other was also in charge of that. I never did know that. And I did not know that Darrell was married before Shirley. Her name was Kathleen. I don't know, about 10 years I think they were married. I don't know if they had kids in that union. He had 3 kids, I didn't know that. Stephen, Darrell Jr., and Cheryl, I believe was her name. But then he met Shirley, and Shirley was a lot younger than him, I understand, but a real sweetheart. Keith maintained that he never ran into anyone that had anything negative to say about Shirley. And I always got the impression that she was very devoted to Darrell and took care of his business. She actually, I guess the way they met, she was working as his secretary, but I'm not completely sure of that. So the police had a station for a while, and that makes sense. They have to have ways of communicating. KRBA broadcasted, this came from another place, Wortham, let me go back to the Forest Capital R.B. Wortham of paper mill fame was also involved in this Forest Capital broadcasting. And now what happened was, I didn't have any inkling about the rivalry that went on, but the Kurths were strong, and the Temples and the Kurths butted heads, I'm sure, many times. Wortham was some of the group of men that got that together. But I don't have any indication that Yates faltered. And if you know anything about the radio stations in Lufkin, they've changed hands a lot. KTRE broke up, the radio station, became KLUF. There was KLN. KSBL became Kipper. And I think KLN or KUF became Kicks, if I'm not mistaken. But Darrell, and the family have had this a very long time. And it's been most of the time there on Calder Square. I got a little lesson I thought I knew pretty well about city directories, but for a time period there, they didn't list the phone numbers. And I sold Yellow Pages once, and the non-regular phone book, that's what Consolidated calls themselves, the regular phone book. The non-regulars were the Yellow Book and Transwestern. They buy the numbers from the phone company, okay? Maybe they didn't want to do that. Maybe they thought, well, our niche is not the phone book, our niche is something else. But, in the beginning, they had 3 digits, and it went up from there as well, And Lufkin, Lufkin took off. Pitzer Garrison one time spoke for me at the Historical Commission, and he pointed that between 1900 and this was a little after 2000 he spoke, Angelina County grew by 430%. Nacogdoches about 300. If you know much about St. Augustine County, it's shrunk. There's only about 10,000 people, I think, in the whole county. But so with that growth, that helped him and his staff a great deal. Now, Keith enlightened me that most of the time with DJing, most of the time this was a part-time thing. And there were people, I would suspect that many of the people that DJ'd also had to sell advertisers and help collect that to keep their shows going and things like that. At about, from what I can tell, in 1953-54, Darrell was single, and he was living on 208 South End Boulevard, which I think is it's behind where Save-A-Lot was. That's where Dead at South End. My uncle Posky lived across from the Hudgens in that end block there. I don't know if that's 200 or what, but that's South End. Then later they moved over on Newsom, and then which is near Marcus, isn't it? Somewhere over there. Then they moved on Persimmon, and also he branched out. There was a grocery store later called Yates Superette, which originally was called Yates Grocery. Now, what I can't figure out is Harold Yates and Shirley Yates were listed together there. He had a brother, but in the obituary it listed brother as Howard, as I recall. But later on he acquired, his name appeared with that grocery store, and also there was some Thelma's Beauty Shop connected with that. Now, later on, as you know, they did mail freight contracting, where they hauled the mail for the post office. But he also had a company called Heavy Haulers, way before. It was on Timberland Drive, about 1006 South Timberland, I think. Way before he did the other. He also had some variety stores down in the valley, which I didn't know about. And in the article, he takes the credit for bringing Toyota to Lufkin. So he had his fingers in lots of pies. Probably clearly back then, I remember that, every waking moment when I was a teenager and my sister was a teenager, the radio was on, no matter what we were doing when we were in the car, except later on when the 8-tracks came out and the cassettes and we could listen to something else. But the request line, I asked how long that went on, and it went on a very long time. Keith, not casting aspersion on him, but didn't, to me, have a solid answer about why they canned it. He thought maybe it was a little too yokel, that the other bigger stations weren't doing that, and so they didn't want to be identified as being local, yokel, or folksy, and so they canned it for that reason. But I remember calling into it, and he said the phone rang off the wall, because Keith used to do that. One of the things that has happened along the way to radio is, Mike can jump in on this, is automation has eliminated a lot of the jobs of DJs. Now, I get the impression, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, that personal live radio is kind of coming back a little bit, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, it's
more than it has over the past 5 years now.
Yeah.
But maybe it's reverting back to kind of like what we talked about, or what you originally talked about, maybe doing it more as a part-time
Yes.
gig, where you can bring some of these guys in, like me, that do 500 other things, that can come in and knock out a show and still be live and still interact, versus having to pay that person a full-on salary. It transitions into other things. If you're on the air, you can do what you want to do.
Oh,
Builds
yeah.
up your name and then everything.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned Panther football, but the other thing he did was he started broadcasting at the suggestion of, was it J.R. Nutt? Was that his initials? The pastor at first? J.R. Nutt, they started broadcasting First Baptist services very early on, which probably didn't hurt him at all from a PR point of view,
Did it for a long time, too.
Did they? Mm-hmm. And
Broadcast, I'd be interested to know how long ago it was they quit. Because I remember my folks turning it on if they weren't able to go, or, on Sunday night or something. It was on Sunday morning and Sunday night, I think.
was it?
broadcast.
Okay. And also,
How about that?
if I'm not mistaken, men like Kai Lee and Guy Lee and his brother, he had a brother named Avery, and I think there was maybe one more or two. They would go down there and sing on Sunday morning, and there was a man that called in.
Sign.
Huh?
New Sign Church, the Black Church New Sign had a gospel chorus that sang.
Really?
I bet they sang on KRBA.
Yeah, and of course,
I remember listening to them on the radio,
yeah.
that New Zion Gospel Chorus.
Another man called in. We've only done this show on Friday about 3 weeks so far, but a man called in. I believe his name. He was from Hudson, named Frank Hope, and but there were preachers who had sermons. You know, they would buy like 15 minutes. I remember when I got back I sat out of seminary a couple of years after Sasha was born in 1978, and I got home, you know, I was just going to rest, and Hamp Keithley told me, said, you know, because you've come home, I'm resigning and I'm going to leave, and I know that the church will be in good hands because you're here, you know, and you can exercise leadership. Well, Gene Brookshire asked me if I wanted to have a radio program, and I didn't do it because I was already teaching on Wednesday nights and other things, but they would buy segments and they would have their sermons on there. Hamp Keithley, probably because of his dad. I think his dad sang too, didn't he? Yeah, they would. He had a program for years and years and years and years, and I remember that people would talk to me about listening to his program. So now, no, Hamp Keithley, the pastor, had a religious program. Yeah.
I remember my mother every morning.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, when we ate breakfast, we listened to Hamp and Eggs, you know.
I'd sing a happy anniversary song.
That's right, yeah, yeah. I still remember that too.
Happy anniversary to you.
Now, they were, you know, FM was not very prevalent for a long time. I would say in the 70s that it broke into this area, and it looked like it happened all at once, you know. Now they are going back to simulcasting. They have a 1260 FM, AM, NBC Sports Channel. Is that what it is?
Yes.
And they have a frequency that they're going to simulcast that on FM, and then they're going to do the same thing for KRBA. Huh?
103.7.
Yeah.
1260.
Now it's going to be on in the next week or so.
It's on now.
KRBA's on simulcast.
No, not KRBA. KRBA will be a little bit, but
The 1260 is already.
1260 is on right now.
Yeah. So
103.7.
103.7. So, and as you know, they got off into Hispanic programming and all of that. So, there's much that I could have done. I didn't know I was the program until I think I called Thursday or Friday, and I said, you know, I need to talk to Stephen. Well, he's not going to be here, so you know, this is it. I'm the undercard here, but I'm the best you got today. Okay. So, is there anybody that has any questions about anything pertaining to them? Let me say this. I did not realize until I was doing this, I thought Bill Bartlett was probably there a year. I think it was about 3 years. It was about 3, according to the city directories, you know. And then he went to work, He went to work for his dad. But
High school, wasn't it, when he was working there?
I don't know. Usually in the city directory, they would say student, and if they had a job, they might list it, but it didn't list that, so I don't know. Actually, I have always thought, was there someone else named William Bartlett too? Did he have a grandfather named William Bartlett? Well, you know, usually I've spoken on city directories and using them, but there's 2 addresses listed for William Bartlett, one on Charlton and one in another place, and I've never seen that happen before, so I guess I'll add that to my list of anomalies. So, well, anybody have anything you want to add, or Mr. Alvarez, you've been awfully quiet over there. That's troubling. That's troubling. Usually when
You better just leave me alone.
Did you ever listen to the request line when you were in high school?
Sure I did.
Did you ever call in